They're great. You guys are great. So I have a question I want to ask in one moment, but of course, the most important question I could ask of all today is, are you here to learn some things? And are you here to grow? I am. By the time I leave today, I hope to have seen something new and have found a way to apply that to my life so that I can grow spiritually closer to Jesus. So let's let that be our guiding light today. There's a question. I just thought I'd throw this out. One thing we'll find in our readings today, and it is truly throughout the Gospel of Mark, is that there are many moments where there's this juxtaposition between faith and doubt. People trust Jesus, and then they're not quite sure. They back off a little bit. And I wondered if you had ever experienced that in your life. Has anybody, and would anybody be interested in sharing that? A time where you kind of had that tension between faith and doubt, between trusting and some ambivalence. Anybody remember a time, please?
I'd say my whole life has been a combination of faith and doubt, and I would say that my doubts are greater than ever in some ways now, but so is my faith. This is a paradox, but
it is a paradox.
I have more questions, but I also have more confidence that even though I don't have the answers, that God does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And oftentimes, when we don't have the answers, as they say, we still try to live into it and trust. I think the old adage is something like, I may not know the way, but I know who walks with me through that. And that has served me at times in my life. Anybody else? Yeah.
I think that when I had not gone to confession for a long time, and when I went to confession, I so wanted to believe that I was forgiven, and I don't know that I really believed it. Because I would think, how could I forgive that? And so I really struggled with that.
Yeah, that push-pull on that one. Yeah. One more? Peg?
It just seems like when you're in doubt, you go back to the Word. And I just go back and say, Father, I stand on your Word.
Okay. Are you always successful with that? Are you? I had a sermon I preached one time, and I really spend a lot of time trying to come up with the sermon titles. In seminary, I really steered clear from the preaching courses. I really wanted nothing to do with them. I happened to take the one introductory class. It was terrible. I just didn't want to do the Princeton way. I just didn't. But there was one thing I got out of that class, and it was the image. The guy said, imagine that you're on a bus going down Fifth Avenue in New York, and you go by all these churches, and the signs are out front, and they've got the sermon titles on them, right, for Sunday. He said, which one would you get off the bus for? And I thought, well, that's a good one. What would be an engaging enough sermon title that you'd get off the bus? So I always try to put some effort and thought into the sermon titles to try and pique your interest. And there's one, I remember a sermon I wrote. Doubt is the ants in the pants of faith. It keeps you moving. That's what doubt does. You know, that faith and doubt, that tension. I think we all live in that. Nobody is perfectly faithful. Nobody's perfectly doubtful. But there's that tension. And if we can engage our doubts, they keep us moving. They're like the ants in the pants of faith. Thank you for your comments. Listen, yeah.
Will you please give that get off the bus sermon before season's over?
Okay, buddy. I'll see if I have any notes on that. I'll see. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Hey, 5 and 6. Let's take a look at 5. Remember, the 4 was about the sower, the parable of the sower, and we talked a lot about that. Let's take a look at chapter 5 and then 6.
They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me!" But Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside. And the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man, and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, A large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him. "My little daughter is dying. Please, come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion, with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat.
Thank you to Mike Rojek this morning. I find these to be terribly moving stories. The demoniac who comes, who's full of demons, Legion is his name, for we are legion, we are many. The woman with the flow of blood is such a terribly moving episode, and I think they do a great job here. Let's start with a very large question, and then we'll focus more specifically. The first line in the Gospel of Mark begins how? Somebody just read the first sentence. Go ahead.
The beginning of the gospel about Jesus Christ, the Son of God.
Okay. The beginning of the gospel. Remember, there is a point for which Mark wrote this gospel. And it is, as we know what gospel means. Somebody tell me what gospel means. Good news. Mark is wanting to set the good news forth here. That's what he says from the get-go. Tell me what you think is the good news in these stories in chapter 5. What do you think is the gospel? What is the good news? Marty, you got a thought?
All things are possible with God.
Almost nothing here is impossible. Someone else? What's the gospel? What's the point? What's the message? Matt?
Resurrection of Jesus, power of God, the Son of God, and faith.
Thank you. Sorry, Christy. Somebody else?
That's powerful.
Dick?
If you have faith, good things will happen.
If you have faith. These are stories about faith, are they not? Okay. Somebody else? Kathy?
God has come for all people,
Yeah.
not just certain elite people. Or most of the
What
people.
kind of people do we see here? You're acutely on target.
Ordinary,
I'm sorry.
ordinary people.
Ordinary
and
people.
needy people.
Ordinary people. This, yeah, Kevin.
I think the people that were involved were considered basically outcasts and or sinners.
Sometimes we call that the marginalized. Okay? People who aren't at the center of things.
I think it says more than faith. It says if you have to have faith, but you also have to have an action with that faith. They all came forth and they all approached Jesus. And
Yeah.
So we can't just sit back and think about faith. We have to move with it.
Faith is a verb.
You know, the interesting thing about all this is we look at the miracles and things that Jesus did. He said that we would do greater things than he did. That's a scary thought.
Mm-hmm. And he will expect his disciples to do that. Someone else? Larry?
Jesus showing himself to be the Son of God by having power over death,
Mm-hmm.
a little 12-year-old girl, having power over illness and over Satan and demons.
The powers of evil. You heard Larry when he read that first verse. The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, and now through these stories, it's almost giving evidence for that. He's made his statement and now he's telling you why. He has power over these demons. He has power over sickness. He has power over death. These are indications of his assertion Jesus is the Son of God. Now, I want to get back before, I know y'all got comments, and I'm going to get there to you. But I'm back at Kathy. The gospel is for everyone. When we look at this demoniac that was out there, wasn't that a great depiction of that demoniac? So the demoniac, I think we consider him to be a Gentile, a non-Jew. And then the next one is this leader of the synagogue, Jairus, and where his daughter has died. And so he's Jewish. This I think is significant that Jesus and his ministry is for everyone. Now, if we were reading Matthew, we would get a different slant on this. This would be let's use Mark's words. Matthew might have said the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Messiah that the Jews had long awaited. Okay? But Mark wants to say, as will Luke, that the gospel is for everyone. Who had a comment?
Oh, I just had a question, that when we talked about that how Jesus always tells people don't tell, why would Legion, did he tell him to go tell?
Does he tell him to tell?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, he did.
You all caught that, didn't you? Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he had mercy on you. Good catch.
Yeah, well, he's telling the Gentile person or person to go back to your village and tell others.
Mhm.
That's because that's the way of spreading his word to a different group of people versus
Perhaps.
in the Jewish communities and leadership, because it's too early to tell. He doesn't want to deal. It's not time for him to deal with the resistance amongst the Jews, but he also wants to set a pattern for spreading the word amongst people that don't know about God or Jesus.
Yeah, we have really tackled I love the fact that you pointed that out. We have tackled this question a few times now, and I think it's fair to say that we haven't nailed it down to one answer. But there are various possibilities of why Jesus had this messianic secret and asked people not to tell. And I kind of like the idea that that's left open for us to wrestle with every time. Danny?
I like what Art had to say. I also think he chose him to go tell people because everyone knew him and knew how much pain he was in and how his foolish behavior was.
What was their reaction, though? What was the reaction of these people that had seen this demoniac for years?
But they wanted Jesus to leave. So that
They
in the other
wanted
cases,
him to go.
Jesus said, "Don't tell anyone," because mobs of people would be coming at him. In this case, they were saying, "Go get back in the boat," and he knew he was getting back in the boat. So go ahead and tell people in your.
Oh, he wouldn't be crushed upon.
Yeah. With everyone asking him.
And I think that's a really good point. And doesn't this story lead into then where he got, and there were a lot of people waiting for him there? And when Jesus had crossed again into the boat, verse 21, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. And that's when Jairus showed up. That's interesting, Betsy. So you know, he was getting into the boat and going to go across the sea, and they couldn't necessarily follow him, and so he said, "Go tell everybody." But by the time he got across the sea, there was a crowd waiting for him there. Ernie?
Well, and Jesus is the Son of God, obviously, but
Not obvious to everybody.
Both of these tell the story of how, he was in greatest esteem. He knew when stars he created and so forth. But in two cases here, he put all that aside and dealt with a demon-possessed man who a lot of people would just pass by.
They wouldn't have anything to do with him.
He also dealt with the the daughter of a
synagogue leader.
And so that person would be somebody that would be absolutely opposed to him, but he wasn't above dealing with that person's need. So it tells us of his greatness, but it also says what a great person is willing to do.
I think it says something even more than that, and you're good to lay that groundwork for us. I think it also is a message to us there's no need that we have that he won't want to help us address. Whatever faces us in life, you know, the storms, the illnesses, whatever struggles, that I think it's not reading too much into it to suggest that Mark was not just writing a historical narrative, but he was wanting to send a message to the early church and beyond to us, that if Jesus can do this for them, he will do it for us. Okay, I'm going to give you one last shot at it. Yeah, okay.
Jim, don't you think that one of the reasons that people wanted Jesus to leave is he had just cost somebody, several $100,000 worth of livestock.
I wondered who would feel sorry for that farmer.
I feel sorry for the pigs.
We don't know who owned those pigs,
We sure don't.
but it must have been a little traumatic to see 2,000 pigs, jump into the sea.
Man,
What's next, So I think they were a little scared at that point.
they didn't know what was going to come of his power.
Well, I'm a farm girl from Central Illinois.
Whereabouts?
Champaign County,
Oh, whereabouts?
Mahomet, Illinois.
In Mahomet.
Near outside of Champaign, Illinois.
I grew up in Champaign-Urbana.
So you know.
I know, that's why I'm asking. Yeah.
I mean, I have always struggled with this passage, thinking.
Thank you.
Blessing for Legion, but it sure wasn't a blessing for this herdsman or the man who owned these pigs.
I thought I was the only one that was sensitive about that. Thank you.
This is devastating. This is unrecoverable loss. And plus food for the entire area. Nobody would eat these pigs that were full of demons. And it's just a tremendous loss.
Oh, I'm so pleased to hear this. Yes.
And I have never been good with it.
New Hampshire.
The Jewish people didn't eat pork anyway. They didn't eat.
The Jews didn't. The Jews didn't. Gentiles might.
The Gentiles found them.
Man.
Well, it had to be herdsmen.
But you know what? These people were afraid of Jesus. Maybe afraid of his power. They were confused. They didn't understand what this represented. And what they wanted was for him to go. They wanted him to get away. Marty?
The demonic power was so strong, it took 2,000 pigs to get rid of it. I mean, that's how I looked at this passage. Like, gosh dang it.
Okay.
What about one pig? Can that suffice?
Well, in Legion, there are many, we don't know how many thousands of demons were actually there.
Let's check out that next chapter.
Jesus left there and went to his hometown, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. Where did this man get these things? They asked. What's this wisdom that has been given him? What are these remarkable miracles he's performing? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his own town, among his relatives, and in his own home. He could not do any miracles there, except lay his hands on a few sick people and heal them. He was amazed at their lack of faith. Then Jesus went around teaching from village to village. Calling the 12 to him, he began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over impure spirits. These were his instructions. Take nothing for the journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in your belts. Wear sandals, but not an extra shirt. Whenever you enter a house, stay there until you leave that town. And if any place will not welcome you or listen to you, leave that place and shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. They went out and preached that people should repent. They drove out many demons and anointed many sick people with oil and healed them. King Herod heard about this, and Jesus' name had become well known. Some were saying, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, and that is why miraculous powers are at work in him. Others said, he is Elijah, and still others claim he is a prophet, like one of the prophets of long ago. But when Herod heard this, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised from the dead. For Herod himself had given orders to have John arrested, and he had him bound and put in prison. He did this because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, whom he had married. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. So Herodias nursed a grudge against John and wanted to kill him, but she was not able to because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. When Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, yet he liked to listen to him. Finally, the opportune time came. On his birthday, Herod gave a banquet for his high officials and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. When the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guests. The king said to the girl, ask me for anything you want, and I'll give it to you. And he promised her with an oath, whatever you ask, I will give you, up to half my kingdom. She went out and said to her mother, what shall I ask for? The head of John the Baptist, she answered. At once the girl hurried into the king with the request, I want you to give me right now the head of John the Baptist on a platter. The king was greatly distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he did not want to refuse her. So he immediately sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. The man went, beheaded John in the prison, and brought back his head on a platter. He presented it to the girl, and she gave it to her mother. On hearing of this, John's disciples came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they didn't even have a chance to eat, he said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. This is a remote place, they said, and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. But he answered, you give them something to eat. They said to him, that would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? How many loaves do you have? He asked. Go and see. When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed. They had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret and anchored there. As soon as they got out of the boat, people recognized Jesus. They ran throughout that whole region and carried the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages, towns, or countryside, they placed the sick in the marketplaces. They begged him to let them touch even the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. The Pharisees
I've got lots of comments and questions, but I said to myself watching this, you have to give them first shot. What were your reactions to these stories? What grabbed your attention or questions? What's your reaction? Okay, Denny?
It seemed like many of the ordinary people had more faith than the disciples who had been following and watching and listening.
Or even the religious leaders too.
Oh, especially.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I think one of the things that we run into probably more often than others is with Herod when he was asked for John the Baptist's head. He didn't really want to do that, but he went to the crowd.
He went with the crowd.
I think so often we make our final decision based on what will be popular rather than what's right.
Yeah.
I think there's a message in what Herod did. Be careful what the decisions you make, because it might come back to haunt you.
Okay. Pam?
There was no boundary to his miracles. He was capable of anything on earth and the heavens he could control.
Yeah.
Everything imaginable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I always thought about when he was feeding the crowd there, that you can't outgive God. He always gives us more than enough.
There are oftentimes these stories, and then there's commentary about faith. The woman with that flow of blood is such a moving story, because she had faith that only if I could just get near him, even just touch the hem of his garment, I could be made whole again. I mean, think about that. She didn't even expect to have Jesus do whatever he would do to her. If I could only just touch the hem of his garment, that would be enough faith. And what does Jesus say to her? Woman, your faith has made you well. These are often the stories, the point, the meaning, the reason for these stories is to point to faith. If you have faith, Matthew would say you can move mountains. And that's interesting. I don't know why I always catch this. When Jesus was feeding the 5,000, Jesus wasn't feeding the 5,000. Huh?
He was feeding 10. I said 5,000 men.
It was 5,000. But Jesus gave the loaves and fishes to the disciples and told them to feed people. Did you catch that? He had them sit down in groups of 50 and 100. And then, what does he say?
We always have to partner with him.
We have to partner with him. Yeah. And taking the 5 loaves and 2 fishes, verse 41, he looked to heaven and blessed it and broke it and gave it to his disciples and gave it to the deacons and had people come down the center aisle. This is a very direct reference to what we call the Eucharist, to the Lord's Supper, right? I mean, we can see that. But I love the fact that he had them sit down in these groups, and taking the loaves, he blessed it and broke it and gave it to the disciples to set before the people. This is kind of one of those quiet little insertions that it would have read pretty much the same if he hadn't included that. But Mark included that to say, okay, folks, here's how Jesus' ministry goes. Jesus feeds you, you feed the world. Jesus takes care of your needs, you take care of the world's needs. Don't miss that. You know me, you know how my mind works. I get an idea and I can't let go of it. And oftentimes when it comes time to figure out what to talk about on Sunday, I'm going for those little things that could almost get lost in the cracks, and the things that you know are there but don't get said, because oftentimes there's so much in that. This is one of those. He gave it to the disciples to give to them. You, my friends, are the disciples. You get that? Jesus has enlisted you and me. Don't forget that when the new settle arrives, okay? I've had so many, well, I've had a few minister friends who were waiting for some new settled to come, and they were really in churches where churches wanted the minister to do the ministry. We're more like conductors. We're like conductors. And I'll tell you something. We're the conductors in the symphony. You're the horn section. You're a drummer. You guys over there, those four of you, you're the string section. I have something. I wouldn't lie to you. Come over to my office. I already have it ready. I bought a baton. It's sitting on my bookshelf there. I'll show it to you. It's the last thing I'm going to do when I'm here. I'm going to hand it off to the new settled minister. The ministers are the conductors. If you don't have a conductor, it can get pretty chaotic. Everybody playing their horn and drums and strings and cellos and clarinets and flutes at the same time. You need somebody to direct. But if you don't have anybody playing, you can get up there and wave that baton all day long. That's what a minister is. A minister is a conductor. The church is the symphony players. This comes from something like this. And Jesus gave it to the disciples to give to the world. Okay? Hi.
I like that analogy.
Good, because I already spent money on the baton.
It kind of ties in a little bit with the segment on Jesus sending out the 12 disciples.
Yeah.
I've always been amazed that he gave them authority and power to preach the good news, to drive out demons, anoint sick people, and heal them. Now, as Jesus' followers today,
Yeah.
then maybe we can't all do the things that Jesus empowered those disciples to do.
And I'm betting they couldn't do what we could do.
As you intimated, there is a lot we can do through the power of His Holy Spirit, working through the Word,
Of course.
and the sacrament.
Of course.
It's
Yeah.
up to us, I think, to try to discern what we're able to do and use the gift that God's given us to further the kingdom.
And don't you think, Larry, embedded in this, that it's true to say that Jesus gave them everything they would need to go out and serve others in His name?
He equipped them.
Okay, I like that. He equipped them.
I was a little surprised after Jesus had the disciples feed the 5,000.
Yeah.
They should have been very convinced of His power.
Wouldn't you think?
Yet, as they left and they were in the boat, I think He sensed some doubt and had to show His authority over nature as well by walking on water and stilling the winds and the tides.
Yeah, wouldn't you think that taking up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces, that might have convinced them? There had to be another sign of who Jesus was. We go, and this is a sign, a miracle story that points back to the first verse in the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Just in case we who are reading this are just like everybody else and still don't get it. Good point. Good point.
I think another thing to remember is there were a lot more than 5,000. They only counted the men.
Exactly.
There were women and children there
Yep.
as well. So it was probably at least 10,000 to 15,000 people that were actually there and fed. Because they fed all of them, but they only counted the men back then.
That's right.
Matthew adds the phrase besides women and children.
I was looking for that. Besides women and children. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people. All right. Well, whether it's 5,000 or 6,000, I'm still impressed.
It is really kind of a gift to us too, that to see that these disciples could not believe for a little bit, and that was okay, and that Jesus was so understanding that He just showed them more. So that helps.
What a great point. What a great point. So another way to say that is the spiritual journey is a process. We haven't all arrived. And some of us are going to struggle more than others on that tension between faith and doubt. And some days we're going to be more on the doubt side, some days more on the faith side. But it takes a while, just like this 3 years of Jesus' ministry and the struggle that the disciples and others had to get it, even though, as you say, there were so many signs that pointed to Jesus' identity. It's like, and I'm sorry to say, we shake our heads and go, oh boy, can you believe those disciples? Like we don't have a problem. Bill.
I know we're getting close to the end, but I'd like to make a comment.
Good.
I told you your sermon about the bus, okay?
I haven't forgot, Bill.
I think what we've read today is the foundation, which means we need to take some action, with our faith. And the one part that really impresses me is where he takes the disciples and sends them out 2 by 2.
Yeah, I was hoping we'd get there.
Okay, because we all have hesitancy and fear about our abilities individually.
Yeah.
But when we work together, we are much more effective. And let me give you an example.
Please do.
This is a personal, real story.
Thank you. Thank you.
50 years ago, we lived in Massachusetts. And we're a little farming community. We had a underground river, fresh water. The town next to us needed water. And we offered to sell it, but they didn't want to sell it. They wanted to take our properties and get their own water. We had 2 busloads of people from our little farming community, went to Boston to legislation. And this is how we organized it. Everybody was 2 by 2 in the bus. And we basically had everybody take a senator or a congressman. Those 2 in there and went to each office before the hearings. Okay? We obviously defeated them. We kept our own water. They wanted to sell it to them. But they weren't going to take our property, okay? Because, again, the farmers were going to be in a place where they couldn't have cows on the land, stuff like that. So you can be very effective if you work together.
2 by 2. That's a great story, Bill. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I heard that. Bill was saying at some point you got to get off the bus. You can see a great. I'll just use the analogy. You can use a great sermon title, but at some point you got to get off the bus and put your faith into action. And Bill's making the point. It works really well when you do that, not just alone, but 2 by 2 with somebody. Ernie, you had a comment.
Well, when he sent them out, he sent them with nothing. They didn't take any food or anything, and or wallets. And at the time, the leaders of the church, if they were going out to a community, they would want to be paid. They would want something for them. But what he's saying is, you go out and expect nothing for yourself and minister to these people that have need.
Well, that's what it's about, isn't it? We've been talking about that in church. I'm hoping 1 or 2 people have been hearing. We all have a calling. We all have a calling. And our calling is to serve one another and to spread God's love around this world. And I hope
that you got to get people on the bus.
Got to get them on the bus.
Yeah.
We should get a bus, take a ride.
Get on the bus, guys.
Get on the bus. Get on the bus. Okay, Larry.
Just one observation.
Please do.
Until the season of Lent begins.
Yeah.
We're still in Epiphany.
Right.
Which means Jesus showing forth his being the Son of God, the Savior of the world.
It's the revelation of who Jesus is. Right.
And I think these two chapters are a marvelous account of Jesus showing himself in various ways for who he was.
That's a great comment. Thank you. Thank you for that. So here's what I'm hoping today. I'm hoping that you are growing in your understanding of who Jesus is. And I'm hoping, Lord, I'm hoping that you're going to get off the bus and put it into action. I love you all. God bless you.
I want to say something to you, but I don't want the microphone on.
I'll take the microphone off.
Rude awakening, the grand